Remember him looking me square in the eye and saying, "Do you want me to turn you into hamburger?"
Poppy Wilson is a person in recovery and domestic violence survivor in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Poppy spent most of her life around horses, but didn't realize the healing power that they possessed until she met a horse named Pablo.
We were like in the same place in our lives. He came from a really abusive past. He was terrified, and you used to go, I'd walk by his stall and he would climb the other wall to try and get away from people, right? And eventually I was able to gain his trust. And that was like one of the defining moments in the beginning of my recovery and coming back to horses.
Today she works to bring people to this healing power with her longtime equine companion, Jupiter.
It just became really important to me to follow my passion and just do what I want to do. And and not apologize for it. Like, I just want to bring people together with horses because I know the power that holds.
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
What's up, Poppy? How are you?
I'm good. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to finally have you here.
Right? Yeah.
Man, I remember the first time I invited you. I don't remember exactly what you said, but it was like the vibe you had was like, hard stop, Dan. Hard stop. Immediately no.
Yeah. It was a lot of years of resistance on my part, for sure.
Yeah. I don't quit.
Yeah.
There's a saying that I live by in the program. It goes, half measures avail us nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for not quitting. I appreciate you always trying to get me in here and finally being successful, because I think now is the right time.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we jump in?
I'm really grateful to be here today. And it's been a long journey through recovery and through the pandemic and through burnout. And I feel like now is the right time. And I am just really grateful for the work that you do for our community. Honestly, like it's made it such a mainstream thing now to talk about addiction. And that's largely because of what you and Donna do in our community. So thank you for that. And thanks for letting me be a part of that.
That's high praise coming from you. When I think of Poppy, I think of immediately horses. Immediately horses, working with horses, healing with horses. In talking this morning, you mentioned that you have been around horses since you were very, very young. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like? Did you grow up around a lot of substance use and alcoholism?
My parents struggled, and that's kind of their story to tell. So I won't delve too much into that. My mom, struggled with mental health, and my dad struggled with some addiction as well. And they were separated. They separated when I was a year old. So the majority of my childhood, I went back and forth between my parents every 2 weeks. So they split custody right down the middle, and I lived 2 separate lives for most of my upbringing. And for the most part, like, there was never craziness in my home. There was never parties or, hard drug use in front of me. But my dad really struggled with marijuana addiction. And, people think that is sort of a safe, soft place to land. And I saw how it really, affected his life in a negative way. And in turn, in some ways affected my life in a negative way. He just, he just couldn't really be present. And so even though my dad was around and things were quiet, I was often, I grew up biologically as an only child. So I spent a lot of time alone as a kid. And my mom really struggled with mental health and depression. So she was, in her room napping a lot of the time. So I was, again, by myself on both sides of where I was living. So I became really self-sufficient, and I just figured out ways to cope, and I found family elsewhere a lot of the time. And like in the beginning, that really served me well. And it, like, some really amazing family that I still lean on today came out of that need to find connection and family when I was young. Right.
So what do you mean you found family elsewhere? You found, like, are we talking about you getting into the like the party scene? Is that where you found family?
Not at first. No, I like my best friend growing up, we connected around horses. She loved horses too, and we're still friends today. We've been friends since we were 8 years old. and I just became part of that family. So her mom would ground me and make me do chores around the
Really?
house. And oh yeah, like I was right in there.
Yeah.
And Danielle's grandfather had horses at the racetrack. So that's, and my grandmother, I kind of sidestepped on that, but my gram was a really avid horsewoman, and that's how I initially got into horses. So I was about 3 when she started putting me on horses.
Wow.
And we rode together into my 20s. She rode until she was 83 years old.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So she was a really huge part of my growing up with horses and animals. She always really made note of the importance of treating them kindly, of doing the best that you can for them, of, always putting their welfare first. And so this kind of love for them and that life just grew between us, and we've always shared that,
How old were you the first time you got drunk?
12, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I ended up getting drunk, and then I got punched out by somebody and made out with some dude in the bushes, and it was just let's do that again.
Whoa. So I'm throwing my pen around. I'm getting excited here. So, yeah, I mean, that was for me too. When I made a mess of myself the first time, Belcarris, Saskatchewan, in some basement, my best friend. And I was a mess, and I don't need to go into that story. My listeners have heard it a billion times, but it sounds like it's kind of the same thing. You woke up and I would say a normal person would be I am not doing that again.
Right.
But but not me.
So fun.
I was that was a rite of passage for me. Would you agree?
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then it just opened up this whole other that I didn't know I could feel like that. It just opened up this thing that I really wanted to delve into.
The thing you've been missing.
Yes.
Did you feel like you were missing something before that?
Now I know I was just seeking connection and community and family, I think. And then I didn't really realize that. I always felt like a lot of us, I was kind of on the outskirts of everything, but I just thought that was okay. That was the way my life was, But then as I started to get older, in about 15, 16, then it was the age of fake IDs and getting into the bar. And then it started to ramp up, and things started to happen that were scary, but I just sort of ignored it. And we were, as 15 and 16-year-olds, we were in the bar sometimes 3 nights in a week.
What was scary?
Just the people that we put ourselves in situations with, much, much, much older men, going to, dangerous parties where we didn't know anybody, getting in cars with people,
Where did you grow up?
Here in Saskatoon. Yeah.
Okay. Yikes. Did you so it served you for a while? It filled it gave you what you were looking for?
It was fun.
It was fun.
Even though we were in those dangerous situations, it was still fun for a long time, unfortunately.
Yeah. Did your drinking and using, did it get in the way of your relationship with the horses, with your grandmother?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was right in that time when I was in my late teens. I had a horse at the time, and she just kind of recognized that they supported that horse for me. We boarded our horses just outside of town. And they'd always, because she kind of started that love for me when the old horse passed away that I grew up on, they bought me another one. And there was a time where I had just stopped riding, and it was probably going on a year, and I was partying and everything was ramping up, and she just came to me and said, I think we have to sell him. He's not getting the attention that he needs from you. And that was heartbreaking, but not enough to stop. Right. And so I just really delved into the party scene for quite a few years. But I think for a long time, I was really good at because of the way that I learned to, isolate and mask things. I carried on for a long time, partying really heavily and using really heavily, and still working 3 or 4 jobs. I always kept afloat, right? So for a long time, my addiction was really under the radar because I thought I'm still managing,
The way you worded what you just said there made it sound like your connection being lost with the animal drove you deeper.
I mean, I've never really thought of it too much, but that's fair. One or the other, right? They kind of go hand in hand. You can't be connected and be using. So that kind of all of your relationships, including the bonds that you have with animals and,
Yeah. From what I understand, horses are very intuitive. Was there a time that you noticed the horse was acting differently around you because of the lifestyle you were living?
No, because I was too faded. I didn't know what was going on around me at all. I thought, I was only concerned with what was going on with me and, how I was going to get to feel better or who I was going to hang out with or be able to buy or whatever. And it just,
Yeah. So when did you start to notice? And did you notice first that you were out of control and like perhaps like going to end up dying, or did someone else notice first and tell you?
I had put myself in a place, like I was working at a bar, running on tips. I didn't have a bank account. So it was just kind of like easy money in, out. I was spending it all on using. And I surrounded myself with people that used almost as much as I did. So for the most part, I just fit right in with everybody. Once in a while, people would be like, holy, slow down. But I thought, what I was hiding was that even after I went into the wee hours of the morning or the next day with those people, I would start going home and using more and exhausting all of my options to try and find more, even past those people that were already abusing drugs and alcohol, So it just started to be, I started to notice that it was really taking over and that I was using differently than anybody else. Yeah.
Do you think with your Indigenous heritage, you're Métis, correct?
No, I'm not.
You're not
I'm
Métis?
not Indigenous. No, I'm white.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I've been telling people you're Métis.
Oh, no, I'm not. No.
Oh.
So this is kind of the unique part of my story, is that I grew up in a mainly Indigenous community at the racetrack. So it's probably 90% Indigenous. And that's part of where, I found another family group sort of in the racetrack. So a man named Alphonse Lavalley kind of took me under his wing when I was a kid. And at the time, he was still drinking. He started bringing me out to the reserve to Piapot when I was very young, when I was like 14 or something. And when people would ask who I was, he would just start introducing me as his daughter. And he never wavered in that. He never offered an explanation. He never said, like, they would be like, she's your daughter, like, she's white. Who's her mom? Yeah. And he'd be like, don't be nosy.
Well, you've even got a bit of the accent when you start talking like that.
I grew up, but I grew up for a long time, and like I spent 20 plus years on the racetrack, and like, when you're on the racetrack and you have horses there, you're there all the time. Like, you're completely immersed, and the community is mostly, I would say, 90% Indigenous there. And I spent a lot of time on the reserve, and I was lucky enough to grow up like in ceremony, like going to ceremonies really young, going to sweats. So I was really brought into that family.
So you growing up, you had ceremony, you had culture, you had community, you had connection, you had all of the things that people say, like, oh, if we all had that, none of us would be alcoholic, and it would be, you had it all.
I did.
So, and we'll get into what brought you into recovery, but if you had it all, what were you looking for?
I think that a lot of times those things are in place, and I just was so disconnected from my spirit and searching for community and searching for, family when I was really young, that I didn't know how to access those supports. It didn't make sense to me yet, and I just think, like, I really cherish the journey that I was on, because it's brought me to some really incredible places now. So I think that, even though some things are hard, like, I'm never sorry that I was addicted or the things that I went through, because like a lot of us say, like, you wouldn't be the person you are today, right? So I'm grateful for those struggles and for, not knowing that I was able to access those supports at that time, because it wasn't my journey to do that.
Mm-hmm. When did you maybe start to consider
Right.
that maybe there's a better way?
There was a point the first time that I went to a 12-step meeting, and that's how I found recovery eventually. It's not how everyone finds recovery. It's just one of many ways. The first time I went, I was in a really abusive relationship, and I was living in Calgary. He had kind of moved me out there and moved me away from everybody I knew. I didn't have any family or friends there. And so he really started to control my using out there to benefit him, kind of, so that, I was able to be manipulated and kind of kept under his wing. And there was a point where that kind of blew up and things got violent. And then it was like, okay, something has to give. What's going on here? So the only thing that I could think of was that, it's bad when we use together. It's bad when we drink together. Like, maybe I have a problem. Mm-hmm. That was really short-lived. I went to one meeting, and I think A, I wasn't ready to get clean then, and B, I was in a situation where it wasn't possible to stay clean because he was really pressuring me in that, like, why do you have to clean up now? Why do you have to be such a stick in the mud? Wait, like, it's such a pain in the ass that you're not drinking right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that I didn't feel it was right for me. I think I went in there, and I remember listening to people, and like the thing was, it was like the typical AA. It was lots of old white guys, and like maybe one woman or something was in there. And there was definitely things that people said that I could relate to. And I remember taking home that pamphlet and doing like the questionnaire of, am I an alcoholic? And it was, of course, like 11 out of 12 things. Yes.
If you open this pamphlet, you're an alcoholic.
I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And then I just like tucked it away. I was like, ooh, I can't show anybody that. Like, yeah. And then I just tucked it away and I forgot about it because I had so much going on in my life and I was living in fear in that relationship. And I just didn't want to do anything to rock the boat. At that point, I just did not have the strength or the courage to try and fight that battle as well at the same time, So I think we eventually moved back to Saskatoon together. And through that relationship, my addiction just started getting more and more powerful. And things just got more and more violent in the relationship. And I remember clearly, like when I left him, we had been out for dinner and he was mad for some reason. And we were walking down the street in like a quiet neighborhood. We were walking home and he called me, like, he just started saying like, nobody else will ever want you. And then that, he's like, I'm taking care of you. No one will want you. You're an addict. And I never really like identified essentially as being an addict, but I was like, oh, that's weird. And I remember that night we got home and things got like so volatile that I remember him looking me square in the eye and saying, do you want me to turn you into hamburger? Like, just shut the fuck up. And I just started thinking, like, if I don't get out of here tonight, he's going to kill me. Like, that's where I just thought, like, this is what this man is capable of, like the way that he looked at me. And there had been other violence in the relationship, but not to that extent. And like, I'm a scrapper, so I fought back when there was violence. But I just remember feeling really like I was trapped. Like at that point, I was trapped in that relationship. And that's not something I experienced before him. Mm-hmm. I really never thought, like, I've always been able to stand up for myself. And I've been pretty scrappy and like rough around the edges as a kid and as a woman growing up. Some, yeah, definitely fist fights and stuff when I was younger. So I really never pictured myself getting into something like that. And I thought, wow, this is how it happens. It's just like, I don't know why, but I'm trapped here and I can't figure out how to get out. Like, it was such an emotional prison and I could not figure out how to get out of it. And eventually, like, I think that night was when he scared me enough that I thought, okay, he is abusive. Like, there's no justifying it anymore. Like, this wasn't my fault. That wasn't, And so I called a friend and left and went to her house the next day.
You said your fault. There was a period of time where you believed his violence against you was your fault?
I think so, yeah. Like, I thought maybe that I, not necessarily thought it was my fault, but I thought there was things that I could do to control it.
Okay.
And if I just appeased him, I wouldn't get him worked up, I wouldn't talk back, that it would be okay. But then I started to realize that that was not the case. And no matter how hard I tried to appease him and not piss him off, he always blew up anyways. And I started seeking counseling then as well. And some of the like pivotal things for me was that my counselor had said to me, like, when he flies into these rages, like, because I would tell her, like, well, he can't control it. Like, he just goes out of control and he can't, it's not his, whatever, maybe not that it's not his fault, but he can't.
You would say that, though?
It's uncontrollable, right? And
you would
she
say
said,
it's not his fault?
Well, I would say that it was uncontrollable, right? Like, he would just fly off the handle. And she looked at me and just said, like, okay, you're saying that he can't control it, but if somebody knocked on the door in the middle of that, could he bring it down and answer the door? And I said, yeah, absolutely, he could. And that just clicked for me. I thought,
just clicked for me.
She said, this is a choice that he's making. This is not uncontrollable. And I just thought, okay, you're right. Like, he's choosing, just because of his trauma, whatever his past was, it doesn't make me, it doesn't mean that I have to be in the way of it. And I just thought, wow, yeah, he's making that choice. And that changed a lot of things for me. And that just solidified, like, I need to get out.
Mm-hmm. So how'd you get out?
I just went and stayed with a friend. And it was like one of the most awful weeks of my life, because I had a Rottweiler at that time. Her name was Roxy. And I'd had her since she was a pup, and she was about 10 years old. And I lived in a house with my ex with this dog. And when I moved out, I needed to leave her with him to take care of her because I was moving to a friend's basement, and I just wanted to leave her for a little bit. And at the same time, she was having these really awful health problems. She was getting old. And I ended up having to take her. I went back to the house and I took her to the vet, and he did some tests, and I ended up having to put her down that week. So it was just like such a loss, like, and that was sort of, that's another instance of animals in my life, and like the loss that I felt, and that how much support I got from her. Like, she was like my best friend. She went everywhere with me. I took her out when I worked at the farm. She would come out to the farm and chase horses with me all day. And, so I've always had that bond. So to be in a situation where I was doing something that was so earth-shaking in my life and leaving somebody that I loved because of violence, and then also being without her, it really put me into sort of the darkest part of my addiction. I no longer had him keeping tabs on how much and when I was using.
So it got worse for you after that?
Oh, yeah.
Now, you mentioned you left someone you loved.
Mm-hmm.
Did you love him?
Absolutely. I thought I did at the time.
You thought you did. Looking back, though.
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah. I did. Yeah. Not all love is healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. Like, I did love him. Yeah.
Was relationships like did they go hand in hand with your substance use?
Not until then. No.
Mm-hmm.
Often I was hiding it from a partner, like, or I was just in a crowd where it didn't matter who I was seeing or whatever. We were all kind of using the same,
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of where it took a really dark turn, was in that relationship.
And then it got worse when you left the relationship.
Yes.
And it sounds like maybe not an amicable split.
No.
But there was a conversation and you said, I'm leaving. Can my dog stay here? Like, it wasn't like you escaped in the night or something, right?
Kind of. I did. I left when he was at work the next day, and I just sent him a message and said, I just have to leave Roxy here for a couple of days. Like, but I moved all my stuff out the next day, and it was actually my adopted dad, Alphonse, that came with his truck from the racetrack and loaded my stuff up and moved me while he was at work.
Now, and you mentioned you'd gotten counseling. Was this at that time? Or was this like after you'd entered recovery?
Yeah, it was leading up to it. I started seeing a counselor just because of the abuse, and she was actually now that I think of it, she was probably one of the first ones that said, like, maybe you could quit doing coke for a while. That helps your mental state.
That was going to be my next question. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
you're still using and stuff. You're exiting the relationship. You see.
Yeah.
Okay, so what did that conversation sound like when she said that to you? What did you think?
She was like, well, are you using any drugs or consuming any alcohol? And how often are you doing that? And it was probably every day at that point. And she was like, well, maybe you could quit even doing cocaine for a week. I was like, oh, of course I could do that. Yeah. And I don't know if maybe I did for a week. I'm not even sure, but I definitely wasn't.
So you were honest with her then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was at a point where I was pretty desperate.
That is typically not a trait that us people who are addicted are very good at.
Yeah, I think I was really starting to get sick of myself. And that was sort of the beginning of the end of it. Like it took a few more years yet, or a couple more years, but that's when I started the journey of trying to figure out how to wriggle free of this life. Yeah.
So what did that look like then? You exited the relationship and you said things got darker. Like what did darker look like?
Oh God. So I moved in with a friend, and then, like I said, there was just no accountability. Nobody was keeping tabs on me. You know, I didn't have a dog to take care of. I didn't have a horse for that period in my life. And I just used whenever I could. You know, I was working at a bar. I think the really intense part started when my roommate at the time had some people that she was involved with, and they ended up keeping a large amount of cocaine at our house. And I don't think anybody knew that I knew where it was. And I found out where it was, and then I was using as much as I wanted every day, all the time. Like it was like just open a drawer and there's as much blow as you could ever wish for. So that really drove things quickly, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't know if I ever, they never confronted me about it. So I don't know, there was enough there that it wasn't even noticeable. So that's a pretty bad situation to be in when your addiction is just starting to unravel, right? Yeah.
I was in a situation like that with meth once.
Yeah. You think it's oh my, this is everything I've ever dreamed of.
Yeah. No, and I had landed. This is it.
It was gross.
I've arrived. Yes.
Yeah. It was gross.
It is.
Yeah.
Yes. So then what? Are we getting close to the time you entered recovery? What was it? What was it that sent you into recovery? Was it one pinnacle moment, or did a series of events take place?
I don't know. And it was just a series of really desperate kind of nights and being, confronted by people in my life. And I remember, and I was working at the bar this whole time. So I was just drinking every night, using coke every night. It was just became a really gross cycle. I remember laying on my couch. I was living in a basement suite and I was really sick. And it was the afternoon and the next day. And I was laying on the couch with my back to the TV and I could hear, it was Kat Von D talking about her recovery at the time. And it was she said, I've been clean for 5 years. And I just thought I'd never heard anyone talk like that before, about being clean or being sober. I didn't know anyone in my life that was. There was nobody that went to AA. And it was that was the light bulb. It was just, and things happen. I think the universe just sends us what we need. The universe speaks through a lot of different pathways. And that's what I needed to hear at that time. And that's what made me get up and look up a meeting list. And I went to a meeting, a day or two after that. So initially when I cleaned up, I thought, I can just quit doing coke. I'll keep the alcohol and that's fine. That's okay. I'm going to keep that little thing to myself.
Yeah.
So I went to an NA meeting and I quickly realized that alcohol is also a drug. I thought it was called Narcotics Anonymous. Maybe I could get around it.
Yeah.
So I went to the Saturday night meeting at Grace Westminster Church.
That was my first meeting too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just remember sitting in that huge meeting in a church basement, and I could not believe the things people were sharing out loud. Like, I was like, that's exactly what I did, but I would never tell anybody that. Like, how embarrassing. Be quiet. Like, and people came up to me and, a couple of people hugged me. And I remember when they asked, like, if anyone was new in recovery or anyone coming back, and I very, like, sheepishly put my hand up, and someone beside me kind of drew attention and said, like, this gal put her hand up. And I just was so grateful for that because, I felt like people had my back and they were speaking up for me. And it was really, though, like the things that people said in those rooms that I could not believe that other people were dealing with. Like, I just thought that this was something I needed to deal with and keep a secret, and that there was nobody else out there like me. And I think a lot of us feel that way. And that's why I'm so, like, outspoken about my recovery. And I identify as an addict out loud a lot because secrets keep us sick. And that's, I needed to talk about those things and know that it was okay to not be okay. And I know that sounds really cliche, but it's so true. Like, people suffer in silence, people die in silence. And, all we need to do is reach out, and you could really be like, with a couple of kind words, you could change the trajectory of somebody's life. So I just think it's really important to be loud about who we are and where we've been.
Take a quick break. I'll read off today's sponsors and we'll get back at it.
Awesome.
Okay, this episode is premier sponsored by Pawsitive Connections Lab at the University of Saskatchewan, who has just released their Animal Awareness for Substance Use Workforce Education. In this course, you will learn how to recognize the role of animals in recovery and the wellness journey, identify evidence for the human-animal bond, distinguish animal roles and interventions, including service dogs, therapy dogs, emotional support animals, and our pets, identify therapeutic benefits and concerns, incorporate animals ethically and professionally, and generate and share ideas for practice integration. To learn more, go to www.positiveconnectionslab.com. Métis Nation Saskatchewan has announced its path for the pursuit of self-government. As an MNS citizen, I am proud to see my government fight to protect my rights. This is our moment. To learn more about the treaty and our path to self-government, go to ourmoment.ca. Pine Lodge, the treatment center I went to 7 years ago when I got sober, offers inpatient addictions treatment and aftercare programming in Regina, Saskatchewan. To inquire about services or make a donation, call 306-510-1891. Wellness News, Choice for Healthy Living, is a local resource that works to connect people to health and wellness related products, services, and expert advice from industry professionals, locally allowing us to connect and engage. Check out wellnessnews.ca or skwellnesshub.ca today to learn more. To make contact or to learn more about today's sponsors, to check out our merch, or if you want to show us some love and buy us a coffee, all of those links are also in the show notes below. Now, it sounds to me like towards the end you were seeking relationships. Was there ever any point where you thought the relationship was going to fix you? Because you are laying out a strong vibe about needing accountability in your life. And even though your boyfriend at the time was so abusive, you said that he was keeping you accountable to a certain extent.
Yeah, like he wanted me to use when he wanted me to use, and not ever without him.
And if you didn't, you were a drug addict.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did that follow you into recovery?
Relationships?
Yeah. That need for accountability through relationships.
Definitely the need for accountability, but no, by the time I got to recovery, I was really ready to just like do what someone told me to do as far as like how to get better. I was really sick of the way I was living. At the end, I feel like I was, like a lot of people say, I was using to die because I didn't, I remember thinking about suicide and thinking that like I just could not live the life I was living anymore. And I was so sick of it and in a dark place, but I couldn't stand the thought of my dad having to find me. And, I thought he was the one that was around me the most, like my my biological dad. I was really close with, or I am really close with him today still. And I thought, like, if that's what I do, then I'm leaving that burden with him, you know? And so instead of that, I thought, well, I'm just going to use as much as I possibly can, and whatever happens, happens.
So it was a conscious effort then.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I just didn't care anymore. I just didn't care about saving the life I had, because what was to save at that point? Like,
what did that look like? What did the next year look like?
the next year, I started going to that same meeting, I think every week. And I would just, at that time, I was still working in the bar. So pretty early on, I got a basic text, and I would just, go to that meeting once a week. I'd work during the week, and then I would run out of the bar and go home at the end of my shift and read that book. And I just started reading the stories in the back, the ones that, like, the short little blurbs that talk about people and their experience and how they came into NA and how they're recovering. And that just made me feel like this is where I need to be, because every story spoke to me in some way. Every story was telling my story in some way. So what do they suggest in the rooms? Get a sponsor. So I did that. I got home. I relapsed another 2 weeks later. So then I thought, okay, now what? I've got a sponsor. I'm still relapsing. So now I got to start the steps. And I remember talking to my sponsor then, and just after that second relapse, and just feeling so defeated, like, this isn't working. And she said to me, I remember clear as day, she was like, well, maybe you're not ready. And I just thought, for fuck's sakes, like, I just felt like, don't leave me on this. I need help. I'm going to die if I'm not ready. So that's when I started working the steps. And I was accountable to myself in those steps. And, my sponsor played a big role in that too. I think about every month or so, we would get together and go over whatever step I had done. So by the time I was a year clean, I was very close to being done a set of steps. And I did that just by doing oftentimes one little bullet of a question per day. And I would just start my day with that little bullet question, and then go on about my day. And I think at that time too, I got into x-ray school. So I'm an x-ray tech by trade. I went to Kelsey for 2 years, and it was a really intense program. So once I started those steps and started into school, there was no time for anything else. And it was just, I was ready to go and ready to recover. So
where did the rubber hit the road for you? I mean, you said it was in the steps. You identified that. Are there any defining moments that really helped you, that where you thought, like, I don't need to drink anymore?
Honestly, that really happened for me very early into working the steps. That happened for me. Like, that the urge to use, the desire to use was gone as soon as I started working those steps. It also taught me how to be able to have relationships with people, like healthy relationships with healthy boundaries. Like, the first place that I learned that was with my sponsor, somebody who I could trust, somebody who called me on my shit, and those are really important skills to learn in the beginning. Because if you come into recovery and you keep doing all the shit you were doing out there, you're not going to feel so great without the booze or the drugs anymore. Like, you don't have that to numb. So for me, I really had to get down to the bottom of why I was using in the first place, and process all the shit that happened throughout my using.
When did the horses start to come back into your life?
The man that I left that was really abusive he as kind of I'm one of the, like, part of the I'm sorry cycle after a really abusive episode, agreed to buy me a horse because he thought that was going to get me healthy again, which it actually did. So thank you. And so now I had my own horse that I could pony off of. So ponying is where we exercise race horses off of our saddle horses. So I would ride him and lead another horse on the track to exercise them. And we'd also do that when we brought them onto the racetrack before races. So I started doing that full time. And then my adopted dad, Alphonse, he brought in this horse that I was talking about him yesterday too. His name was Pablo, and he was this black and white paint. And that horse was really, we were like in the same place in our lives. He came from a really abusive past. He was terrified. And you used to go, I'd walk by his stall and he would climb the other wall to try and get away from people, right? And eventually I was able to gain his trust. And we had a really bonded, incredible relationship. And that was sort of one of the defining moments in my experience with animals where I really started to recognize like the deep bond that we can share. And that was a horse I remember one of the first times feeling like I was in flow with. Like I remember working off of him and on the racetrack, and I would be riding him and it felt like we were one unit. Like I was so like we were just in sync with each other. It was just such a beautiful experience to be able to interact with him. And that was like one of the defining moments in the beginning of my recovery and coming back to horses.
You said that you felt this flow, like as though you had become one, and you just flowed together.
Yep.
Now, in past episodes, this flow has been described as sitting by the river and watching the river flow, watching the geese fly this way. Like you see all the geese flying this way, none are flying that way, because that's against the flow of the universe, right?
Yeah.
So would you say that you sort of discovered that flow through your relationship with Pablo?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the first time that I ever experienced that, and I have since, but it was a very definitive moment in my life with animals and recognizing the power that they hold, to heal, really. The work that I'm doing now and the manner in which I'm coming back to horses, I'm definitely able to see how it can coincide with recovery. And I'm actually looking at trying to structure something that what I'm doing now is equine-assisted learning. And it's under the umbrella of animal-assisted intervention. So that includes equine-assisted learning, just activities with no objective. And then also therapy is something I'd like to add eventually. And that's something that's done with a facilitator, a horse, and a therapist. So I'd like to join together eventually and be able to bring a therapist in and do that work as well. Because I'd really like to be able to pair equine-assisted learning exercises with the steps of the program, or at least sort of the objective of the steps, because I think it's about like equine-assisted learning is about teaching people life skills with horses, basically using horses as barometers to sort of self-reflect and work on some things about ourselves. They're really good at that because they are prey animals. And they have to be really aware of their surroundings. So any kind of shift in energy, heart rate, blood pressure, horses recognize it from a long ways away. So they react to that stimuli, and they react in different ways, but you can't lie around a horse. Like they know when you're lying. They don't lie. They don't overthink anything,
I don't know how a horse calls you out on a lie. You say you can't lie around a horse. Like, what does that look like?
Often it looks like, well, they can be reactive to your actual mood underneath. So it happens all the time, really, in different ways. But if I bring my day out to the barn, the horses can be, depending on the horse, they're all different. They teach in different ways. But the horses can be reactive to that. They can be harder to handle, pushy. If you're having a hard time with boundaries, horses will teach you that clearly. Really? Absolutely.
One time a horse picked up my wife, Donna, by the butt.
She told me that story when she was out. What a visual.
Yeah. I don't know what she was doing wrong. She was just trying to groom and the horse wasn't having it. So the horse removed her from the situation.
Yeah. And sometimes that, a horse really needs to be level-headed and be able to handle themselves and be able to handle the emotions of people, because they get a lot of hands on them. They have a lot of emotion running through them. They have to be able to process a lot and manage it. And not all horses are equipped to do that. Even older horses that are settled, not all of them are equipped to do that. So Jupiter's been like a really amazing teacher. He just jumped right into this role, and I still ride him very minimally, but this is kind of his main role now, and he's really come into himself in that. And the horses are all reset after we kind of rebalance them with a series of exercises to kind of help them process and help them get back to a good state of mind before we put them back out for the evening.
Now, you're an x-ray tech.
Yep.
Now, you worked at St. Paul's.
Yep.
Now, St. Paul's is in the middle of our most vulnerable demographic in the most vulnerable neighborhood. Did any of your experiences at the hospital there on frontline service provision influence you into what you're doing today?
I had a really amazing opportunity to be able to use my recovery in a lot of those instances and really relate to people at ground level, and I feel like I tried as much as I could to kind of use my voice in recovery and be really open about my recovery there to try and bring some light to the struggles that a lot of those people are experiencing, and try and bridge the gap between health providers and the community that they're serving.
Was that something that was like really prevalent to you, like very noticeable, how our healthcare providers were really falling short when it came to serving people who may be addicted?
Not a lot of people come from where we come from and clean up and go into, healthcare and service professions, I mean, a lot of us that do clean up go there, but let's be honest, a lot of us don't clean up.
Yeah.
A lot of us don't make it here.
And I've noticed this in the past that, because I've done that, because I've stepped away from that life, I've surrounded by people who have also stepped away from that life. And it makes me feel like, oh, we're everywhere.
Yeah, but we're not.
But we're
really.
not. No, you go out into the real world and some people still look at you sideways when you start telling your story. You know?
So I was in the real world and seeing it from the inside out and seeing like, no, that's not the way that is for that person. Like just doing my best to try and shed some light on the perspective that patient might be having, and I don't know, just not that I think I'm the be all end all on it, but I just think we have an important role when we come into positions like that, to spread the word that like, look, just because somebody is addicted, it doesn't mean they're worthless. You know what I mean? And this is what can happen if you're given the right support and kindness and compassion. You can come out the other side and be somebody who's helping in that community, right? Like, and I just always think like people that are really rigid in their views around addiction and harm reduction, like bring it back home. If it was your child or your sister or would you not want them to just be able to stay alive until they can make it to treatment?
Yeah.
So, and that's all I feel like I've been given a gift to be in this role and to be the places that I've been allowed to be in. And I just think we need to do as much as we can with that to help our community.
You're developing a course.
Yeah.
Tell us about that journey. You stepped away from what you knew with the relationship, and then there was the substances, and then you went into school right when you got sober. So you developed this identity of being first a student and then an x-ray tech.
Yeah.
Right? And now you're stepping away from being an x-ray tech into the big unknown. And I can relate because look at this where we're sitting today.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to hear what that's like for you with that shift in identity, even with your recovery that you have under your belt.
I think I just got to a point where I really started realizing through my experience, at work and with addiction and losing people, even through recovery, that life's just too short. And I don't want to do something the rest of my life that I am not absolutely thrilled to do. I
feel you.
I just don't want to. And I just don't really care about the logistics of what that looks like for my retirement or whatever anymore. You know what I mean? Like I'm lucky to have a job that's stable and I do still have a pension and stuff, but I can't say for sure that I would stay at that for the rest of my life. It just became really important to me to follow my passion and just do what I want to do. And and not apologize for it. Like, I just want to work where I want to work and do what I want to do. And I want to be able to play with horses for the rest of my life. Like, and I want to bring people together with horses because I know the power that holds. So I want to share it with people.
It's scary.
It is scary, but not like I don't know. There's something kind of comes over me that doesn't allow me. I mean, maybe it's scary, but it just allows me to do it anyway. And it allows me to kind of gather myself and stay calm. And like, there's so many rooms that I've been put in recently that I never imagined. Like, I like to stay on the outskirts of things, and I've just been like plummeted into the middle of everything recently, you know? And I really have this feeling, I've talked a lot with my partner about it too, that we are just being led somewhere, and things are really like, honestly, as long as you do the footwork, like I just feel like we're always taken care of. Like creators guiding us, these, you know, people are being put in our paths that we never thought we'd be interacting with. And it's like all over nonstop. This magic is happening, right? So I'm just kind of I don't have time to be scared of it. Like I'm just trying to keep up to the momentum of it, the flow, really. Yeah. Like I feel like the universe is in flow for us. And, you know, talking to you, working with Richard, working in these northern communities, talking to, you know, I work a lot in like Métis northern communities as well, because Richard has brought me there, and I've been really lucky to be able to be a part of that too, bringing horses to youth in those communities. So everything is just happening without, honestly, a lot of effort, Isn't
it interesting? I hadn't seen you around for, I don't know, a bit, you know, like our paths don't cross often.
Yeah.
And then I get called, you know, by MNS. They invited me to go to the elders gathering. And who do I see 6 hours north from Saskatoon at this tiny little Pine House is a village.
Yeah.
Like out of all the places in the world we could have both been, we ended up in this tiny little village at the same. I'm like, holy shit, there's
that's
Poppy.
The kind of stuff I'm talking about.
That's why I brought it up.
People are just brought together. The right people are just connected. If you are, you know, putting the right next foot in front of the other and doing the next right thing, and, you know, keeping yourself, like your spirit healthy, I just think whatever's meant to be will be, honestly. And we can't like hang on too tight to our notion of what we think that looks like, because this looks very different than I ever imagined. So now I have, you know, new goals, and the journey to get to those goals is what it's going to be. I don't know, you know, we don't know exactly how it's going to end up, but
So, but anyways, so tell us a little bit more about what your vision is. What do you, what do you think you're headed towards? What do you want it to look like?
I don't know, something that, you know, we've talked about, Justin and I, is just being able to be a part of sort of a like recovery center with land-based learning and indigenous perspective kind of as the root of it. I think that there's a lack of that. You know, I'm non-Indigenous myself, but like I said, I grew up in community, and that I'm passionate about that, and I see that through people I love and people I've seen come into recovery, that there is definitely a lack of Indigenous culture brought into recovery. So that's something that we're really looking towards, just being a part of developing something that can serve the community better. And that's like serve all communities, not just the Indigenous community, but I think it's, you know, land-based learning, horses, and bringing animals into recovery. That's something that's been done in different capacities, but, you know, I think it's more important than people realize. I have a program specifically that is 12 weeks with 12 exercises, and it's a building block program that Cartier Farms developed. It's trademarked. It's the first nationally recognized EAL program. Has a lot of research behind it. And it basically, each exercise builds on the previous exercise to develop life skills. So we work on things like trust, negotiation, team building, relationship building.
And horses lead the way through that.
Yes, they do. Yeah. They're specially designed exercises that usually people are in groups with 2 people and 1 horse, and they move through exercises that are objective driven. So objectives, like I said, trust, negotiating.
Let me interrupt you there. Negotiating. How does a horse teach you how to give you negotiation skills? Like, this blows my mind, because it's easy to glaze over these things, right?
It's to somebody that's never done it before, it's hard to explain, but it's so horses don't allow you to just glaze over things. Like they're, so there's an exercise called Match That Horse specifically that teaches negotiation, where you have pictures of horses that you need to make whole. So it's like a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, horses are part of it. So we let the horses pick pieces of the puzzle as well. And we negotiate with other teams on what pieces they need to make the puzzle whole. So we use horses in that one, and it teaches negotiation, but it's really hard to explain if you're not doing it. So you should just come out to the farm.
I will.
Okay.
Okay. And the horses pick pieces of the puzzle as
They
well. So
do.
they engage. They're like, oh, it's time to play this puzzle
They're
game.
on the team. And I think like that's part of it. Like people just want to drag the horses around, and they're like, no, hey, I'm on this team too. Like, so it's really interesting to see how they interact with people and how they, if people get heightened, say when they're doing a negotiation, if they're getting like, we want that, and they're getting pushy and they're not negotiating in a fair way, or anyone's getting amped up, the horses react to that behavior too. So we're essentially putting people in situations that might draw out conflict or draw out, character defects. And the horses help to do that. They help to make that really clear.
And that's when a therapist can step in.
Well, we don't use a therapist in equine-assisted learning.
Okay.
So these are just totally separate exercises. The therapy is a different thing, and I would need to like develop something else with the therapy would be a separate portion probably after.
I can see just from what you explained though, where that could be of great value.
Yes, absolutely. And especially for like what I'm really interested in is developing something specifically for people in recovery from addiction, because I think like a lot of those life skills that we don't get, like that a lot of us start using when we're really young. We act like children when we come in here. And, if you don't work the steps and work closely with a support group, you don't learn those skills really. So these skills are things that can be used in your everyday life. And, if you're trying to get into the job force and don't know how to interact with people, we have one that's based in communication that teaches communication. We have ones that teach healthy boundaries, appropriate assertiveness. And these are all things that we can learn from horses.
Is there anything else you wanted to throw in here before we cap it?
Oh, I did want to mention, just because it's sponsored specifically today by Colleen Dell that is running that new program. I'm so interested in that program, and I'm going to definitely look her up. When I was talking about equine-assisted learning and saying that it's research-backed, she ran a research study at Cartier Farms, and I read the whole thing. And I just think it's so incredibly interesting. Her research study was on the effects of equine-assisted learning on young girls with substance use disorder. So this can be used in so many ways, and that sparked me back into it. And I thought, and then it was really funny, like when I was talking about things just happening out of the blue, and like, as soon as I started getting back to this and looking into this program, like I was just certified in April, you did a show with her, and she popped up right after I read her research study. You had her on your show, and she popped up in my feed, and I was like, what is happening here? Right. So she's, whether she knows it or not, she's an integral part of this journey for me. And I really respect her research and kind of being the trailblazer in that area of the bond that people share with, horses and dogs specifically, but all animals. Because it's work that's coming more into the forefront. There's a lot more research around it. And we're just barely scratching the surface of what can happen in this area, I think. So I just wanted to kind of recognize her work in that area.
I was talking with her last night. She's going to be at our event on the 30th of August. And she messaged me and she said, is it okay if I bring my service dogs?
Yeah.
My therapy dogs. And I stopped for a minute. I'm like, Colleen, I've seen you bring your service dogs into at least 4 conferences that you didn't even have tickets for. Like, why are you asking
me? Yeah.
So we laughed and the dogs will be there. But anyways, where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you're doing, whether that's now or in the future?
I'm Poppy Hills on Facebook. You can get a hold of me there.
I'll put a link to your Facebook profile in the comment section.
Yeah, sure. You can do that.
In the show
notes.
notes.
And Poppy Hills is not my real name. That's another story, but Poppy Wilson is my name.
Is
You can find me under Poppy Hills.
Okay.
Poppy Hills was an old racehorse. So it was like an old racehorse's name.
Yeah.
So that's what they used to call me on the racetrack, Poppy Hills. So it just stuck. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
If that's everything,
That's it. Yeah.
that's it. You got it
Thanks,
all out?
Dan. I think so for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
More will be revealed.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Tell Justin the bell tolls for thee.
I know I told him he's not quite ready.
Well, I ain't going anywhere.
Awesome.
So. Okay. Thanks so much.
Cool.
And
Thanks, Dan.
take care.
Yeah.
Okay, if you got anything out of that, please hit that like button at the bottom of the screen. If anything resonated with you, please leave us a comment. We want to know your thoughts. If you liked something, if you didn't like something, if you want to learn something, I'm all about fostering productive conversations about substance use and everything that goes with it. So that's all I've got for you this week. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.